That must mean it is noon in the Central Time Zone and 1 in the Eastern Time Zone and like 4 a.m. in Hawaii. Good morning or afternoon. This is Two on One, the weekly talk show between two theologians with another theologian about pop culture. I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart, one of your co hosts, joined today with the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
That's me.
Yeah.
So excited to be here with you today, Arthur.
I'm excited to be here with you, and it is the last show of 2020.
Can you believe it?
Can you believe it? Because we've been doing this for like months.
I know, and we have just such faithful followers and viewers, and we're just so grateful to end this season. We will start season 2 next week, but to end this season with a guest that we are just so excited to have on today. We are.
But before we get there, I do want to ask, while it's
yes.
just you and me having our time together before we introduce our guest, do you have any New Year's resolutions this year?
You know, I don't, because I don't necessarily do New Year's resolutions. I do resurrection resolutions. So for me, that comes at Easter.
Well, fine. I feel weird for having 21, but that's okay. We're talking about that like next week. Here's my thing. One of the resolutions I'm doing is I want to be more liturgically vested next year, because I've fallen out of that habit doing digital worship, but I feel like a robe and a good stole is the way to do it.
Do you know who you should go to, Arthur?
No, I don't. Please tell me, Spiff.
You should go to Jeff Wunrow Designs, who for 15 years, Arthur, has been making ordinary time extraordinary and making vestments and capes or copes and just everything. He's got masks. Did you know that if you order from Jeff Wunrow, you can get one of the like marching fists, the things that show like solidarity, especially with like Black Lives Matter, or any of your, I know we both do a lot of ecumenical work. So we have partners in other denominations, and he'll put your religious traditions emblem on your mask or your stole or really anything. It's all customizable.
Well, that's because he's worked with a variety of clients over the last 15 years: Unitarian Universalists, Episcopalians, Disciples, Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Catholics, you name it. He's done paraments, stoles, copes, chasubles, processional banners, sanctuary banners. Jeff Wunrow Designs knows what is to be done.
It true.
Is the way.
It is the way. That's a spoiler for today's episode. But did you also know that our listeners get a 15% off discount by using the code 2on1 at checkout?
2on1, you say, by going to jeffwunrow.com and buying a stole or many stoles and using 2on1?
Absolutely. And it is starting January 1. It will be the best deal on the website, the best deal to get a Jeff Wunrow stole. So I hate to say it, Arthur, but did you know that Lent is just around the corner?
Don't tell me that. Do not tell me that.
I know, but for those of us that are continuing to lead our faith communities into the next year, I know that I'm going to be looking for a new stole to kind of mark this kind of new space and time in our world, and so I know that I'm going to go to Jeff Wunrow Designs and pick out a new stole for probably Ash Wednesday, because I'm going to want to order that soon.
Well, you better. You definitely better.
Well, with all,
yeah.
I was going to say, all of that said, you have a little bit of background noise. Do you have that?
It's my heat.
Okay.
I can't do anything about that, and I'm sorry, because I'm in my bedroom, and that's weird.
That's okay. But should we bring in our guest? Because I'm just chomping at the bit.
Yep.
What?
Yep. I'm going to hit admit.
So our guest today is someone that I've been a huge admirer of. Follow him online, and just was so excited when his new book came out, Just Faith, Reclaiming Progressive Christianity. And I just hit my computer with that. How so excited I was. I'm so excited about this, Guthrie. Thank you for coming on. And I just wanted to let you know that January book study for my church is your chapter 3 on Dr. King. Because we gather and the third Monday of the month, and that happens to be his birthday. And I thought, what a great book to really start the year off with our community. So thank you for joining us.
That is wonderful to hear. Thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be on the show.
We are. Guthrie, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you are doing?
Sure. I'm a Texan by birth and being raised, though I spent a few years in DC and then in New York at Union Theological Seminary. I write about religion and politics usually. So pop culture is a little outside of my wheelhouse, but I'm excited to venture outside of my comfort zone. I run a daily newsletter called The Resistance Prays, where we've been praying every day throughout the Trump administration to resist and spiritually defeat Trumpism.
Thank you. It's beginning to work.
Yeah, we are praying. We're not stopping the prayers because there's this whole stunt with like trying to they're still trying to overthrow the election. Anyway, that's politics. And I'm also a fellow at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., where I work with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative on a whole host of issues related to public policy and religion. And I see you both have the book, which is amazing, available wherever books are sold, your local independent bookstore preferably. So I think that's enough background about where I'm coming from.
I love that. We're so excited to have you on. And I think the intersections of what you do are so imperative to the topic of today, which is The Mandalorian. Y'all, our viewers have asked excessively for Star Wars. They want me to dive into this fandom. And so it took a good guess to get me.
Has to be said, even talking over you, I'm sorry about that. If you're watching this and you have not watched both seasons of The Mandalorian and you want to, stop watching this right now and go watch The Mandalorian. Spoilers abound. Spoilers. Like,
and I won't, just as for clarity, and you all know, I won't know what is a spoiler or things of, I mean, I know what's a spoiler in this context, but like for the larger context of Star Wars, I'm a super noob to all of this. So it's very much, I dove in and I'm very excited about it. It's good storytelling, which I'm appreciative of. So yeah. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to Star Wars. Why did you choose this topic?
Yeah, it's interesting. My first kind of experience with Star Wars was The Phantom Menace, the first of the prequel trilogy. I think I was in elementary school, about the age of Anakin. When it came out, I had a Phantom Menace poster on my wall. And I think, to me, I loved it. I realized later all the issues that people have with it, the cultural appropriation, the kind of just bad acting and all the problems people have with the prequel trilogy. I realized later, but for me, it really resonated as like an elementary school kid at the time. And then sort of watched around the same time, I think, the original trilogy and was like, a mild Star Wars fan. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So I always, there's this battle of like Trekkies and whatever Star Wars fans are called. And you have to like pick one side or the other. And so I was always like, I'm a Trekkie. But then I liked the new trilogy. And then with The Mandalorian, I sort of liked the first season, but this second season really got me. I think it was the best Star Wars experience I've ever had. And yeah, so I'm excited to talk about it. But that's a little bit about my Star Wars fandom.
Arthur, what about you? Because everyone knows that I just like the tiny Yoda. He's so cute.
Similar to Guthrie. I got special dispensation from my counterphobic 6 mother to go see Star Wars, the episodes 1, 2, and 3 in theaters at midnight the day they came out. I was a freshman in high school for the first one. And it was nice being the coolest person in the room. It's a mean joke. I'm sorry, Josh Toulouse, particularly. It's but yeah, it's Star Wars is fine. Well, no, I mean like it's fine. I don't have an opinion on how in the 90s they re-released the original trilogy, but they inserted all of these CGI bits into it. So like you'll be able to tell exactly what they are, Spiff, and it's like yeah, the appropriation is a really generous way to say like very poorly masked racist stereotypes for aliens. Like, what do you want to do for this flying junk dealer? Let's make him elders or protocols of the elders of Zion, like stereotype caricature. That never mind. We're not talking about that today. I appreciate your story, Guthrie. It's the same thing, and I guess I'm more Star Trek than Star Wars. I'm really kind of earthbound.
I like it. Well, I want to pose, I guess, our first question, if y'all don't mind, because it's been kind of as someone who came new to the story. So, and again, we were just talking Mandalorian because that's all I know. I was really moved by the way Mando kind of starts off with this very, like, the first thing you kind of know about him is that he doesn't like droids. He asks for like that ship. He's like, no droid leader, blah, blah. And then at the very end, like, comes around to, well, I guess throughout it, like, trust droids with the child, trust droids, with kind of helping out. And I think that there's something about like the hospitality there that of who comes into our space and the things that we are called to hold sacred. Who do we allow to also participate in that journey? And I'm wondering what you all think about that. Where can the church go and learn from Mando's kind of evolution of coming around on droids?
That is a great question. And I think it speaks to the whole arc of the 2 seasons we've seen so far, which is he comes from a very narrow-minded, kind of strict, I think fundamentalist kind of religion. And we learn later, we can get into, it's not the only way to be Mandalorian. But he's fearful of droids. He's just he's very, this is the way, I'm very, this is the way I was taught, and I'm very wed to that. And we see him grow and grow and grow in the 2 seasons to the very end. The last shot is so moving of the 2nd season. But the droids is that thing that starts to break down through relationship, kind of his preconceived notions, and through being like, oh, there's like, I can grow and change, which is extremely hard for anyone, but especially people raised in fundamentalist kind of religious contexts like Mando. So I think it speaks a lot to the church about how we can grow through experience.
Yeah, a friend of mine described Din Djarin as everything but the snake's Mandalorian, which I just loved. Because never mind. I think the challenge with hospitality though is like you have to be able to encounter droids to get over disliking droids. It's something that I've noticed with some churches in the disciples and the open and affirming process, in which it's the full inclusion and participation of the LGBTQ community, is that churches are gung-ho to do it, but then they're like, oh wait, we actually have to invite members of the LGBTQ community in, not to be like us, not to meet our standards before they're able to participate, but like be who and how they are, if that makes sense. It's the only way you're going to find out if you do or don't like droids is if you're around them in the fullness of what the droids are. I find it frustrating of we segmentize as churches, and we also have in mainline Protestantism that desire to create a homogeny that's artificial and more inhibitive than provocative. And I wonder what it would take. Everybody wants a piece of my time today, including my 3-legged cat, who is going to comment. And I lost my train of thought. I beg your pardon.
That is okay. For me, I guess I realized that there were different droids, and also like didn't. I was really throughout all. I think the droid was the very first time that I saw Mando, who I kind of if this is your first thing you're watching, that's your hero. That's the hero of this story. And so to have such a specific kind of flaw at the very beginning, like he doesn't like certain people. He doesn't like, like that. And this is the person that I'm called to kind of buy into. It reminded me, as kind of just what Guthrie said, of of the church. It very much, I don't know how many times I have heard, that's not the way we do it, which is just another way of saying this is the way, right? Like that, like,
You can say it positively. We have to say it via negativa. This is not the way we do it, as opposed to this is the way. Like, sorry.
Yeah, I really appreciated that this is the way, and like that, and but also as people, I'm not a creedal person, and so for to have this kind of creed so drastically lead who he is, I also know the people like that in my life, and so it was very much like, how does this creed that is meant to say, like, here are the rights and wrongs of things, and yet he has this clear personal bias against certain things. I was like, oh, how do we overcome that as a church? I think that's he narrates this journey for us in the hope that I think what most churches, most mainline Protestant churches at least, are hoping to do, right? We're always talking about all are welcome and things, but it's like, well, are we? Are all welcome? These are the creeds that we kind of continue to tell ourselves and yet push back against. And so
that actually leads me to a question. So Guthrie, I really enjoyed your book. I read it this week.
Thank you.
It. You say some truth in it that's very obvious, but I don't think it's been said. And I don't like. There's also subtlety and nuance. It's a great read. I recommend it. Go to bookshop.org and find a copy today, viewers. And at one point, I had the page open and I closed it. Oh, here it is. We also have to come to terms with the reality that conservative Christians are not going to pick up their tools of social control and political pressure and go away. And for some odd reason, I've been in protest movements and in advocacy work for 15 years, and I never really thought about like, oh, there's not going to be a magic argument. There's not a Death Star to blow up that suddenly makes the Empire vanish. Spiff, a spoiler for you that's not really a spoiler. The original trilogy is all about blowing up these huge weapons of war, and it's like the Empire falls, but that's not how power works. What do we do when all of Christianity is in decline? Do we really want to go into like a civil war of progressive versus fundamental Christianity, or like how do we make what's the right way? How do we survive in the remnants of empire as a church that's faithful when we are the empire in part?
I think your point about there's not a Death Star to destroy is really interesting, and one of the things about Star Wars that I find compelling is that they defeat the. These are some spoilers about the whole Star Wars universe, but
I think those have been out long enough.
They defeat the Empire, and then this new menace, the First Order, and Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, appears and kind of. And so these forces of people that are appealing to different values. And to go back to the earlier question about how do we, change and do things, I think you have to realize that everyone is approaching it from their own value set. And I've worked a lot with very, very conservative Christians trying to find common ground on some issues like immigration reform and a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented. And so there are areas that there are agreement, but they also, conservative values are very compelling to people. They're very, placing order over everything else, that, the kind of, you have limited ability for freedom and kind of individuality, but you have security. I mean, I think Star Wars, I think part of what the Mandalorian does so well is it really shows you kind of different sides. It's a little more nuanced than the like 9 main films that are like good versus bad. But those, more conservative people are not going to go away for one, and two, they're motivated in their own worldview by very positive values. So we have to recognize those, find common ground, but then also champion what we believe we're called to champion. So I'm not sure if that gets to your question, though.
No, it's. I mean, I remember talking to somebody who is in relationship with me. I don't think I can say he's my friend anymore. But talking about where he's like, well, what does it matter if you can't be legally married? As I think I was freaking out about Amy Coney Barrett. Still not done freaking out about ACB, but freaking out initially. And I said, here's the whole problem. Like, I love my husband, and I would love him if we were married or not legally. I also want the tax break because I'm a citizen of the country, and like I have equal protection and participation under the law. Um, and it's that was enough for him to be like, oh, well, I guess that does make sense. And I'm like, the government could stop recognizing any marriage if it's a Christian sacrament. It's I really like the idea of security and ordering things because I think the progressive church has to be more chaotic by definition because progress is chaotic. And Spiff, you were going to ask a question. I'm sorry, that was a tangent on my part.
No, I appreciate it. I think it all comes down to one of the questions that I had while I was just kind of watching this, and what are the Tuscan Raiders scene where they come together, where you like, big fan of Timothy Oliphant over here, but I was like, oh, all right, cool. What's up with this guy?
Adam Driver shirtless.
And so do we need a common enemy? Part of kind of what I'm hearing is like, especially when we come together from both sides of the aisle or whatever, it's like, it's to get something done. It's usually to defeat something or to, push something through or whatever. But like, in that scene specifically, like, they'd clearly been at odds with each other in those spaces, and yet come together to defeat this common enemy. And in that process of trust and of trauma per se, they've come together and made this kind of new code, this new understanding of their relationship to each other. And for me, that gives me a lot of hope for the way through, for all of the terrible trauma that we have put upon this nation and certain groups of people more specifically than others. And just, what does that look like for us to find common enemies and move forward? And is an enemy necessary, I guess, for progress?
I think it helps. Certainly, as an organizing principle, one of my favorite sci-fi movies, Independence Day, that speech where the president's like, all of humankind, or maybe he says mankind, is coming together for the first time ever to fight the aliens, and
who are inherently, intrinsically, without exception, evil.
The aliens, right? Yeah, I think that's the flaw of like painting us versus them kind of logic. And it kind of erases a lot of difference and positive motivations. And yet, I think that could be an organizing principle around climate change. We have a existential threat to all of humanity. Let's get it together. And I think we saw that in season 2 with Rosario Dawson, Ahsoka Tano. The Mandalorian.
Wait, is that the Jedi? Is she the Jedi?
Yeah,
she's the ex-Jedi. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But the Mandalorians and Jedi, are ancient enemies. They have not always been friends, and they're like, they come together to like free that planet or whatever. I don't remember all the specifics, but they come together, and it helps, I think, to unite around a common purpose. It doesn't always have to be destroying something or militaristic, but to like, what is our common goal? And one thing to apply that to the church, I think a big not pet peeve of mine, a problem I've seen, I grew up Methodist, and then eventually decided to leave the Methodist church so I could get married in my church. And I was at Fort Washington Collegiate in New York, which was in the process of RCA to dually UCC. But when I was there as their seminary intern, they were like dating different denominations to like try to figure out which one they wanted to join over. And now I'm Baptist in a dually aligned church, CBF and Alliance of Baptists. So anyway, that's all to say I've been around the block with all these different denominations. And I just, everyone is so narrow-minded in my view. Everyone here is like, what about the other CBF churches that are not as progressive as us? And there's a disciples church just down the road that's doing amazing social justice work, has been active here in the Breonna Taylor protests. And people don't see that because they're not Baptist. And so one of my causes of many is to try to see like the progressive kind of wings of all the mainline denominations doing more together, and putting aside their ancient Jedi Mandalorian differences.
So, okay, bringing up Ahsoka Tano, and the Jedi Mandalorian thing, and also just as you were talking, I was remembering. Gosh, you brought up in Just Faith the phrase Bible believing, and sometimes I have arguments with hypothetical people in my shower, or I have hypothetical arguments with hypothetical people in my. I don't know if y'all do that, and I'm sorry if you don't. It helps. Bible believing drives me crazy because the implication is if you don't call yourself Bible believing, you reject Scripture as a whole. But then I'm also like, I don't really believe the Bible. I believe in God the Creator, and I believe in Jesus Christ, and I believe in the Holy Spirit, and the Scripture points to it. Scripture calls me to trust in the deity. All of this to say, Spiff, I would almost say before watching the movies, but you won't have context. After you do Episode 3 in Star Wars, watch the Clone Wars. It's a cartoon that is probably the second best Star Wars made. And Ahsoka Tano is heavily featured in it. She was Darth Vader's apprentice before he became Darth Vader. Long story.
So I watched Clone Wars after 3?
Yeah.
To get the continuum,
I have
chronological.
I have a ongoing list of how I should watch all of this stuff. So that was me making a note of how to watch Star Wars.
And once you finish the Clone Wars, watch Rogue One. Anyways, and then go, and it'll be crazy.
I'll text you later.
Yeah. With this, so the Star Wars universe after Episode 6 in 1983, they started writing the extended universe, and it was novels upon novels and graphic novels and all hundreds of books in which they established what happened after the Death Star exploded. And then they did the prequels, and that kind of messed up the extended universe stuff, but they were fine with it, like whatever, okay. But then they did the sequels, and they just threw out all of it. They just threw out 50 years, not 50 years, 30, 40 years of established lore. They just chunked it. And some stuff has come back in and some stuff has been reworked, but for the most part. So sometimes the question gets asked on this show, Guthrie, what would it mean to reopen the canon? And I want to change my regular question. What would it mean if we just chunked Scripture, just threw it all out and started fresh?
That's a great question. And yeah, when you were talking about what is canon, one of my most favorite professors in seminary was Hal Tausig, who taught my method. While I was in seminary, I was like going through the Methodist ordination classes. And it was a great Methodist crew at Union, most of whom were queer, like in this tenuous relationship with the Methodist church at the time. But Hal taught our Methodist evangelism class. And it was just incredible. And he wrote he wrote a great book called The New Testament, which compiles a lot of, oh, you have it?
I do, it's up on my shelf.
And then we and with another group of students, we turned the Acts of Thecla and Paul into a musical as like a course at Union. It was so great. I found so much meaning in that. I mean, and the idea that you would be threatened, that any kind of expansion of the canon is threatening rather than, add something beautiful and different, and you can encounter God just like you encounter God in Beyonce's music and Kesha's music and all these different modern people. It goes back to that question about values, that like if I change anything, everything falls apart. And if I don't believe every word of the Bible is true, none of it's true. And that black and white thinking doesn't get us anywhere. So I find a lot of meaning in the Bible, so I'm not going to advocate for throwing it out, but I do advocate for finding meaning, in all kinds of modern day scripture writers.
Well, and we inevitably create extraneous canons. We all do. If I were at my church, I would pull off of my shelf the most blasphemous thing I own, which is the American Spirit KJV. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but it's an American history textbook from the 1950s with a KJV printed throughout it. But so like in Exodus, there's an excursus about how Moses leading Israel across the Red Sea is like George Washington crossing the Delaware. and like about like Reconstruction was the same as Ezra and Nehemiah, and it's we all do it anyhow. Um, and I like that. Do you happen to have like a video of the Acts of Thecla um, musical? Because I would actually pay money to watch that.
That sounds amazing.
I mean, I I don't know if a verb recording exists, but it was fun to do.
I got
Um,
I got pushback. I wrote in the chat to us, but that so the Acts of Thecla is my ordaining text, and I got pushed back a lot from like peers being like, yeah, you're gonna probably want a gospel, and I was like, I don't know, if you are a woman in ministry, what is more powerful than baptizing yourself in a trough of eels, because that's the last, you've been pushed to your last straw and the only person left is God with you, and taking your faith and your leadership into your own hands in a space that then in turn takes all of creation to like kind of help support you. I was like, for me, that is the ordaining moment.
Baptizing
But
yourself in a trough of eels is maybe my favorite phrase from 2020.
and how
it
is that,
feels like we've done that.
why is that why is that threatening to anybody? That's beautiful. That your leadership in the church, that of course it's a fact that women's leadership has always been, people are scared by it, and yet women have claimed it for themselves, and that's beautiful. So we but you get those, that goes back to that, like, people are always going to be making that point. Why do, change is bad, that reflexive, anything different is bad. And we have to push past that.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's a little bit of it's Mondo's creed understanding of this is the way, and then you see him kind of chip away at that. Oh, there's different versions of what it means to be a Mandalorian in the creed, and what it means to put on the helmet or take it off, and what is it, who can see who you really are, the vulnerability it takes in those spaces is for me what it takes to move the church forward. We need to be able, we've been saying for so long, we don't take our helmets off because for a lot of reasons, because this is the way, right? And yet when we do, when people start to get a real glimpse and we take that legit barrier out from our eyes, taking our planks out, and really looking at the world that we live in and worship in and are building, that we get to do that from a space that says we can see more clearly, I guess, where we're going, rather than this is the way. Well, what way is that? We've yet to actually answer that question, and I think Mando answers that question for himself kind of at the end, that this is the way. It's through relationship, it's through vulnerability, it's through courage in those spaces. And for me, that really speaks to what the church needs now.
That is beautiful. And I think we should just, the ending is so powerful when he connects with Grogu, the child, Baby Yoda. And is able to kind of expand kind of his view of like what being a Mandalorian is. But then I think we have to go back to when Bo-Katan, like, he meets and is like, you take off your helmet, and it can't compute with his whole worldview. It's like someone that's raised like in a super fundamentalist, homeschool environment leaves and is like, oh, there are other Christians out here that are not raised that way. It changes your whole worldview, that rather when everything else exterior to your faith is a threat, versus seeing, everyone that's not a Mandalorian is a threat. So they're showing their faces because they're not like they're an out group. But then to see someone who's perceived to be in your in group and they're doing something differently, I think allows people to change and grow. Which is why I think on LGBTQ rights, that's been why conservatives are so resistant to even acknowledging the existence of queer Christians, because once I think so many people realize that queer Christians are not this out group that's a threat to the church, but are actually many people, about half, of LGBTQ people in this country are people of faith. It radically shifts people's view, because we're no longer this thing easily rejectable. We are just practicing the faith differently, and that's a lot less threatening.
Well, so this past Sunday, um, for worship, we've done 41 broadcasts in a row because we record in advance every now and again. And I've had more Sundays off this year than I ever have, but I've done 41 or 2 worship services in a row. And we did the Sermon on the Mount, the message version. That was the sermon. And I'm making peace with the message. I saw that look, Guthrie. I understand.
I like the message.
Oh, good. The thing, and I don't hate it anymore. The thing with the Sermon on the Mount is there's very explicit teaching about divorce, and it's divorce is adultery, according to the words of Jesus in any translation in it. And I hedged getting ready for the sermon, and no, that's not fair to do to Scripture, and it's not. You don't get to read 98% of it and leave the 2% out you don't like. But it's one of those of I think about our colleagues in ministry who are divorced for reasons not pertaining particularly to adultery. And their ministry is not negated as often as people in the LGBTQ community. And it's not as if once you get divorced, you can suddenly have that wiped clean, as it were. And please note, I don't actually think divorce is sinful. I disagree with Jesus, and I don't back that teaching up. But it's that if we let this one thing go, if we let our really flamboyant music minister who's never said he's gay, but he has a roommate and everybody kind of knows, but we've never affirmed him, and we're certainly not going to celebrate him in his fullness, if we let that go, then the next thing you know, we're going to be having a Caligulan orgy in the sacrament. Right. Like that's. But we're going to ignore all of the people who are abusing opioids and the 6 people who are having affairs and like a key swapping party because that's our deacon board. Like it's I hear you. I wanted to ask about, forgive me, that was a big jump and a shift. So Bo-Katan and the Dark Blade. And again, like it's Clone Wars and it's Dave Filoni bringing the story in. There's that idea of succession, that the person who defeats the wielder of the Dark Blade is the one who inherits it. An interesting thing that you should know is Bo-Katan had no problem accepting the Dark Blade in the Clone Wars cartoon without defeating the wielder of it in combat. But now she does because it's a good plot point.
So it changed. The lore changed again.
Well, are we competitive in how we hold on to authority in the church? Are we how do we shift that? How do we get people to be more self-sacrificial? How do we accept the Dark Blade? Mm. And if we do we still have the authority behind it?
So, well, my work is all about activism and political advocacy, and I see this showing up when people think it's the pastor's responsibility to speak about the Christian call to social justice. I see this all the time. I'm a deacon in my church, and I just have a pretty strong like anti-clericalism like streak in me, even though I am married to a PCUSA pastor.
I was gonna say, isn't your husband a pastor?
He is. I love we have 5 wonderful pastors in my church who are all engaged in ministry, kind of public activism. But it's like there's 5 of them who are great and do great stuff, and there's 500 of us, and we all have a vote and a voice in our democracy. So I'm always frustrated when that kind of power is held, especially in I know this is held in so many ways in the church, but I see it in activism where it's like, let's do a clergy sign-on letter or let's get a bunch of clergy to come with their collars and stoles and speak at a press conference. And there is a role for that. And I appreciate that. And I do that work myself. And yet I feel called to like, everyone has a voice and can be a leader just in the pew and on their social justice committee at their church in activism and taking a sign. They may not have the stole or the collar, but they can make a sign. My grandmother used to hold these little signs that said, with the Bible quote on them, and she'd hold them at the anti-Iraq war marches and stuff. And And so I was inspired, just everyone can be a faith activist. You don't have to be a clergy activist.
Well, if you need a stole for a protest, by the way, folks, go to jeffwonrow.com. Sorry, do go to jeffwonrow.com. He's our lead sponsor.
I love beautiful stoles.
Well, you are going to love, if you use the code 2on1, you get 15% off your order. But you make a very good point. So it's the democratization of it. And The Mandalorian shows a much more democratized side of the Star Wars universe. It until the very end does not involve the stupid Skywalker family. Where if you think about episodes 1 through 9, it's really just like keeping up with the Skywalkers, essentially. Like it's just one family fighting it out across planets for 3 generations. But this is more of a look at these people on this planet. Look at how these folks band together to fight a sand dragon. Look how this crew of nobodies. I want to talk about the sniper played by Bill Burr, and I cannot remember his name to save my life. The sniper, the prisoner that they get transferred in the second season. When they go into the active base of the Empire,
right,
and arrive with everyone cheering.
Mayfield,
thank you. I remember thinking, oh crap, they're going to make us like stormtroopers. And they kind of did that with another character in another movie, which I won't spoil for you, Spiff. But that nuance that's engaged. I think nuance requires all of us, as opposed to a few of us. Because I can stand in front of my church people and say, here's how you read a nuanced text, and they'll go home and hear about black and white thinking for another 167 hours and then show back up. So getting the 500 people in the pew to come together and to engage in nuance, how do we do that? How do we start those conversations? How do we sustain those conversations? How do we get people to see, celebrate, and suppose that all stormtroopers are not just targets, whoever their stormtroopers may be? And I'm dropping everything. I'm not just trying to disappear dramatically from the frame. I'm sorry.
And he's gone.
Yeah.
The point about the Skywalk, the trilogies being about this one family is very interesting. And I get a sense from people that they feel like, in all the churches I've been a part of, like there are these people, whether it's the clergy or the deacons or a few families that have been around forever, are kind of like running the church, and like the decisions are going to be made, or in the denominations, coming from a denomination with bishops, the bishops were just going to kind of decide where things went. And people don't, I think, feel a sense of their own power and their own ability to like claim their voice in the church, even whether that's through kind of small groups where people can really like wrestle with the text themselves, or this idea that if you're really want to have an interest in ministry, you should go to seminary, and that's the role of seminary rather than the local church, to do like Christian formation and discipleship and biblical education. I'm fortunate. One of my pastors here, her husband is a Hebrew Bible professor at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. So we're always getting these little tidbits of like Bible knowledge, but every church could be doing that kind of wrestling with the text, really asking people, like it's all of us, rather than these people that are like people that know and people that are in control over here that are separate.
I think we got to start just telling your stories, right? Like, I think for me, that's like really, it's all becomes really relational. You only move, as a woman in ministry, the amount of times you get the call where like, I want to talk to the pastor, you got her, and they're like, I meant the male pastor. You're like, that doesn't exist at our church. Sorry. Like we've got 2 female pastors for you. And so it's a lot of that for me is a lot of the like handing down, but it also, when you start to name your own context from the pulpit and or, at the park every Sunday, we confess the sins and we openly state of white supremacy, of racism, and you just have to start naming it, because then 3 years later, having said those words out loud every single Sunday in a corporate prayer together, it is no longer questioned why we as a community are in the streets marching. That is part of what we've been praying for every week. Is now in front of us, right? That the activism meets the prayer where it's at. That we have been continuously talking and feeding and just sharing stories of people, the illustrations we use in our sermons, what we talk about at the table. All of that relates to what we are called to do, which is follow Jesus, who was a person of color, a refugee, a queer person, a person, all of the things that embody who Jesus is, because he is a reflection of us and we are a reflection of the divine. It's one of those things that how we get people in the pews is we start to tell our stories, I think. And that is just kind of the end.
I have to ask our questions too. One of the most formative things I've been through is my campus ministry when I was in college, and my campus minister praying with me as I came out, and kind of having that space when so many things are, you leave home and you're like, kind of like Mando, what's going on? And to have that space. And there was this service he did every year where it was like, he would take questions from the students just out of a fishbowl, and that was the sermon. Which I realize is a very kind of, that would make me super nervous to do.
I did that 2 years ago where I let everyone pick their favorite scripture and put it in a bowl, and I would pick the scripture for the next week. So I had at least a week to prep for it, but I didn't know what was coming. I mean, you kind of know because there was a lot of John 3:16s where people are like, it's my favorite because it's the only one they know. But it was, it's being open to the Spirit and allowing space for the Spirit to move, to kind of move us. That this is the way is a real stagnant vision for who you are.
Until it's done in community, until the armorer says, you have to take this child to its people, and that child's people is the Jedi. This is the way. And he puts himself under the authority of this person who is able to level him up, so to speak. So the fundamentalism isn't this is the way and it cannot change. It's this is the way that informs us going forward. So I really struggle with John 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. Because I read that as Jesus is saying, what I am doing is that which opens up the door. People, though, think that it means Jesus is the secret handshake that gets them into the club where they get to watch the rest of everybody burn. Not my favorite interpretation of my least favorite gospel. What if the way is, this is the way we're supposed to act? And I'm not going to go on that tangent, excuse me.
No, but I think there's something there. It's really about who. So I asked a friend, because I've been asking lots of people about Star Wars because everyone knows this but me, but I was like, is there so Mando in episode, I think 2, talks about his arm or his gun. They're like, can you put it when he's with the people that are looting him? The judge, I forgot their names. He is like, okay, they're like, put down your weapon. He's like, that's my religion, or my armor is my religion. He's got that line in there. And I was like, what are the religions that are functioning in this world, was my question. I was like, what? Because there is a lot of, may the force be with you and also with you. There's a lot of religious connotation kind of writ large throughout this. And I was just like, oh, this is meant to speak to the church. The minute I was like, this is really a apocryphal kind of understanding of the work of community, that that is who Mando belongs to a specific sect of the church, and there are other the Mandalorians writ large. You kind of see ecumenism happen in when they meet, and what it looks like when everyone comes together and kind of moves forward. But in your guys' opinion, what is the religion of the Mandalorians, and I guess what is the religion of this kind of larger space? What is the religion of Star Wars?
I think the religion, I mean, the way of Mandalore, the way of the Mandalorian, I think is their religion. These kind of the armor, the vows to to protect each other, and the all that goes into that. But I think the broader Star Wars universe is very interesting when it comes to religion, in that everyone has religious practice. It's in contrast to Star Trek, which I think is like we'll evolve past religion almost, which you see some in some of the different Star Trek iterations, which I always found problematic. In Star Wars, it's a very like religiously pluralistic society, and George Lucas, I was reading, he said, "I'm a Buddhist Methodist." That he found, inspiration in both his own, the faith he was raised in and other faiths, and I think you see that in like the different religious expressions in the universe that are all different and but are like can be respected.
I think the Mandalorians are. I want to say they're almost Anabaptists, or in that zero tradition of what we do is what we do and how we do it, and it informs the rest of our life on that. The Force, the people who are draped in that, it's almost hyper Calvinism. There's a chosenness with the Force. So here's welcome to Star Wars Controversy 201. The Force in the first 3 movies made is the understanding of it's that which binds us all together. There's like this almost quantum thing. Some people are more sensitive to the Force than others and can manipulate it, but everyone has access to it. Then the prequels came out and they said it's something that's in your blood. Like it's literally through accident of birth. That's what they were talking about with the M count for Grogu. That's midichlorians. And good Lord, that's when the internet was taking off and hating Jake Lloyd, who plays young Anakin Skywalker, and bitching about midichlorians was essentially what the internet was made for. That and, pornography. But then the count becomes, so like, is it something you're born with? Is it something you learn? Is it something you're capable of? Is it something you can't access no matter how much you want to? In The Last Jedi, in episode 8, there's this briefest moment of this orphan kid on some backwater planet, and he has to sweep the floor, and he's staring up at the sky, and he uses the Force to like bring a broom into his hand. And as far as I know, that kid's not a Skywalker, which to me indicates that the Force is bigger than the stories we tell. And I think that's the invitation in all of this. I think I think that's what's speaking to Christianity, but certainly the Western, let's say American mainline church. The Force, the spirit, the realness of what we're doing is so much bigger than our committees and even our provocative progressive stuff and our every time we push the walls out, it's a great first step. It's always a first step. But I'm sorry.
No, I really appreciate that. For me, everything just kind of kept coming back to community. The Mandalorians, their creeds are really what it means to belong, and like so it's really they're just a bunch of concentric circles that make just one circle where the story is just always about belonging, and I was really moved by that because I think that that's really, especially in this digital space that we're all kind of living in, this liminal digital space that we're forced to live in through, the world right now. That's what it is. It's a call for belonging. That I would push back. I think the internet was made for community. That I think that there's something really there, that it's bigger than the stories that we tell, but it is the story we tell, and so it's a both and.
So I like that. And yes, the internet was made for community. I'm skeptical and aggressive in that way. Guthrie, I did want to ask, are you a 5 on the Enneagram?
I'm not a 5.
Okay. A 3?
I'm not a 3.
Do you know your hold on? That was really presumptuous. Do you know your Enneagram? Do you identify with an Enneagram number, Guthrie?
I do. Enneagram 7 with an 8 wing.
Oh heck, I was way off. Okay. Every 5 I know who's written a book includes a data section. In it, and you could have just been writing this from a place of security. I love it. Sorry, total.
Arthur's also a 7, so this is a big 7 energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny. I've never gotten 5 before. I must, yeah.
Hey, at least it's not a 1. I'm just kidding. I love 1s, but that.
I do love all my favorite fictional characters are 1s. I married a 1. Hermione, is a 1.
Yes, very much.
Interesting.
We should
Interesting.
type the Harry Potter universe at some point.
Angela
So
on the
coming
Angela
up,
on the Office. I wonder what if we type any of the Mandalorian characters.
If we could do a second episode of this and just like we'll do an Enneagram come back, we'll do an Enneagram Mandalorian episode.
I did a series in I lead Bible study, and we did a whole series on the Enneagram, which is a whole lot of fun.
Oh, I love that. Well, I want to be cognizant of our time and your time. Thank you just so much for joining us today. This was such a great conversation, and for pushing me off the deep end of Star Wars. I've been dipping my toes, been meaning to jump in for a while.
It only gets worse from here.
Well, all right. Sylvie. But we want to move into our final question, which you will get to answer first as our guest. And as always, the final question is, what biblical story, narrative, theme, chapter, book, whatever, are you most reminded of in The Mandalorian?
Yeah, speaking of Bible study, we also just read Acts. I think after we did the Enneagram, we read Acts straight through, which is a lot of fun. And what came up to me in this kind of, we were talking earlier about like, who is a Mandalorian? Do you have to keep the helmet on? Do you have to not, can you take the helmet off? And I thought about Acts 15 and the council at Jerusalem, and this kind of, it's always brought me comfort that from the very beginning of the Jesus movement, people were having these debates. And so our debates are not new. The tradition of change and the kind of debate about circumcision, whether Gentiles need to get circumcised to join the movement, that debate was from the beginning and continues today. And there's nothing new about change or having debates about change. And so that's what stuck out to me in this kind of pivotal episode where he's like, whoa, there are different ways to practice my faith.
I love that. Anytime we can tell the church that change is biblical, I'm all for it. Like, church, hear me. Change is part of the way. Change is the way.
Oh man, parable of the sower. God is change.
Arthur, want to go?
I'm going to go Acts 10, which is kind of funny because we're jonesing on the same thing. Yeah, cake and eat. I can't take off my helmet. Yes, you can. Do it. Do it right now. I think the other one is Anna and Simeon. The Mandalorian's not the main character. He's not even the main Mandalorian. Boba Fett. I can't wait to know. I can't wait to talk to you after Return of the Jedi about Boba Fett stuff. But they're important parts. Or the Mandalorian is an important part of the story, but he's not the story. And that's kind of the fascinating thing about this Western samurai space opera. Like, the show literally is expanding outside of him, and there's rumors that season 3 may not be about Din Djarin. It may be about a different Mandalorian, which, yeah. So there they are. It's doing their part and moving on.
I like it. So I went kind of large, and this one was hard for me this week. I went writ large, that like the universe, like this story, I guess the Star Wars story for me really reads in my own wheelhouse of revelation, that this is a story about the destruction of empire. It is about the ways in which empire continues to pop up, and the ways in which we are called to be community, to continue to fight it, to say this is not the way that we are to build the kingdom. The empire is not the kingdom. So for me, that was very like, it just loomed over all of this. But there's the line in the dark saber when Bo-Katan is when there's the like exchange of the saber, but it says it's not about the blade, it's about the story. And for me, that was really reminiscent of the cross. I don't particularly wear crosses. I don't really have them around my house because for me, it's much bigger than this one moment, that it is the resurrection, it is the life of Jesus leading up to it, that it is the story there. Is much bigger than the actual symbol. So it resonated there. And then I went with Grogu. I was like, he is the Beatitudes. He is the blessing that comes from being the meek, from being those that are dependent on others, for those that are just everything that Jesus calls us to, and that he is the kind of culmination of that and the blessing, that I really saw the Beatitudes at work in who he was. So those are my answers for the final answer that I really wish we had a song for, Travis.
Yeah, Travis Smith McKee. We've actually asked our General Minister and President Guthrie if she can take away his standing because he promised us a song and he hasn't written it.
It is.
Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons is the author of Just Faith, Reclaiming Progressive Christianity. You can buy it anywhere that theological books are sold. We recommend from a local bookshop. They'll order it special for you. You want to hold yours up too, Guthrie? We can go for a hat trick. Look at that. We all have it. We all enjoy it. Way to go. I'm going to put up our promo for Jeff Wunrow. If you're thinking of going to a protest and you're clergy, or even if you're not and you just want to buy a stole, I bet you he'll sell you one. Jeff Wunrow Designs, celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. Go to jeffwunrow.com. Please use our code 2on1 and get 15% off. Spiff, we have some guests lined up over the next 2 months, non-consecutively. Who are we looking at in 2020?
It's true. Well, next week we have Ellie Rocher, who just wrote a book called 12 Tiny Things, and she will be our guest next week as we talk about New Year's resolutions, which is going to be very cool. And then we have Colin McCraney, and later on in the month we have our good friend Quadri Harris come in to talk. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I do know that he is watching right now. So Quadri, let us know what you want to talk about.
I'm also happy to announce the Reverend Dr. Katie Hayes will be joining us on Ash Wednesday to talk about Stephen King, which will be spooky. And
just like Ash Wednesday deserves.
Exactly. Remember that you shall die, probably at the hands of a clown.
Jesus.
All right. Well, Guthrie, thank you 1,000 times for joining us today on 2on1. It has been our honor and pleasure to get to talk to you and to get to know you more about this way and truth and life, as it were. Thank you very much. And we're going to wrap up the show. So,
see you next week.
All right. See you next week, everybody.